Hi, I'm Tori St. Cyr. Welcome to the Clear and Present Truth. In our last video, we discovered what the cleansing or the justification of the sanctuary was. Well, in today's video, we're going to attempt to understand exactly when was the sanctuary cleansed. Here is your Clear and Present Truth. We remember that in Daniel chapter 8 and verse 14, the Bible says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Now, we remember that in Bible prophecy, a day can be equal to a day, but it could also be equal to a year. And just for the sake of ruling out all possibilities, we're going to perform this video with the assumption that the 2,300 days are literal days. Now, a logical assumption is that the 2,300 days would begin exactly when Daniel received the vision. However, in order to do that, we must determine when did Daniel receive the vision. And the Bible says in Daniel chapter 8 and verse number 1, it says that he received this vision the third year of King Belshazzar. Now, even though we don't have the exact date, most Bible scholars agree that this date was somewhere around the year 553 BC. Now, knowing prophecy always calculates using 30-day months and 360-day years. We understand how many years the prophecy would have lasted by simply dividing 2,300 into 360, and we get roughly about 6.4 years. So 6.4 years from 553 would take us to around the year 548 or 547 BC. And remember, we count years backwards in the BC era. Now, if the 2,300-day prophecy began in the year 547 BC, this would clearly be a problem for us. And the reason why that's a problem is because the historical record reveals that the Jewish temple hadn't yet been rebuilt. So how can the Jewish sanctuary be cleansed in 547 BC when the sanctuary didn't exist? And because the sanctuary didn't exist, it leads us to look for an alternate time frame whereby this 2,300-day prophecy began. Now, most evangelicals believe that the cleansing of the sanctuary was a result of the actions taken by a Syrian king by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes came against the Jews. He persecuted them. He forced them into pagan worship, and he even sacrificed a pig on their altar. And most Christians believe that when they were able to get rid of Antiochus Epiphanes and able to resume the normal sacrifices back in God's sanctuary, that this represented the cleansing of the sanctuary. Now, but do you see the problem with this idea? You see, remember, the cleansing of the sanctuary, the atonement of the sanctuary, is about the sins of God's people. The sanctuary was atoned because the sins of the people were symbolically transferred to the sanctuary, thus necessitating the need to remove those sins from the sanctuary. And thus we understand that even though Antiochus committed heinous acts against God's people and heinous acts in God's sanctuary, the cleansing of the sanctuary was not necessary because he sacrificed a pig on the altar. Another problem with this theory is that Antiochus Epiphanes came down and persecuted the children of Israel from 167 BC to 164 BC, a period of a little over 3 years. For the sake of simplicity, let's just say 3.5 years. Now, do you see the problem with this? The 2,300-day prophecy, if we were to take it literal as far as days, it would be roughly about 6.5 years. But Antiochus Epiphanes only persecuted the Jews, only forced false worship for 3.5 years. So how can we fit a 3-year event, 3.5-year event into a 6.5-year prophecy? In a popular Christian commentary, here's what they say regarding the 2,300 days. They say the expression is peculiar, but it seems to have been suggested by the fact that the burnt offering was offered morning and evening daily. The meaning, consequently, is that the offering would cease for 2,300 times, which is essentially 1,150 days. That's the Cambridge Bible for schools and colleges. Okay, so what are evangelical Christians telling us? What they're saying to us is that even though Antiochus persecuted the children of Israel and forced them into pagan worship and did all these things for a period of 3.5 years, What they're saying is that the 2300-day prophecy is not really 2300 days. Because the sanctuary had a morning and evening sacrifice, even though it was only 3.5 years that these sacrifices were stopped, in reality, it's 2300 sacrifices that the prophecy is talking about. You see, they are suggesting that Antiochus desecrated the sanctuary for 1150 days. And because there were 2 sacrifices that occurred on each day, they simply multiply 1150 by 2, and there you have 2300-day morning and evening sacrifices. Now, if you're watching this video and you believe the 2300-day prophecy is really a 2300 sacrifice prophecy, I need you to understand the following. The prophecy never said anything about 2300 sacrifices. The prophecy clearly said 2300 days. Now, when Daniel 8:14 says days, in the original language, it's Arev and Boker. Arev is evening and Boker is morning. What you also must understand is that this is the same language Genesis used when describing creation week. It would say the Arev and Boker were the first day. Now, despite the clear evidence that when Daniel 8:14 says 2300 days, that it's literal days, evangelicals have doubled down on this idea that it's 2300 sacrifices because Daniel 8:26 says, and the vision of the evening and the morning, which is told, was true. You see, what you must understand is that the sacrifices, the Jewish sacrifices, were always referred to as morning and evening sacrifices. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to get a commentary or a Bible search, an online Bible search tool that can search words of the Bible. And what I want you to do is I want you to search for the phrase morning and evening. And what you're going to discover is that these sacrifices are always denominated by morning and evening. They're never denominated by evening and morning. Notice, let me give you a few examples. Notice what the Bible says in 1 Chronicles 16:40. It says to offer burnt offerings unto the Lord upon the altar of the burnt offering continually morning and evening, and to do according to all that is written in the law of the Lord, which he commanded Israel. Again, in 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 4, it says, behold, I build an house to the name of the Lord, my God, to dedicate it to him and to burn before him sweet incense and for the continual showbread and for the continual burnt offering morning and evening. What I'm saying to you is that the Jewish sacrifices were always denominated in morning and evening. Now, what I want you to do now is I want you to continue searching. I want you to go back to that search tool that you have. And now I want you to search for evening and morning, the same phrase that is used in the book of Daniel chapter 8. And you're going to discover that every time you see the phrase evening and morning, it more than likely is in reference to a time period. What I'm saying to you is that there's no such thing as an evening and morning sacrifice. Sacrifices can only be morning and evening. This gives us no shadow of a doubt that the 2300 days is not 2300 morning and evening sacrifices. The 2300 days are 2300 evening and morning days. But it doesn't stop there. Let me give you another problem that evangelicals are going to face when trying to place Antiochus Epiphanes into this 2300-day prophecy. Ladies and gentlemen, when the Bible speaks of this 2300-day prophecy and the events that surround it, notice what the Bible says in the 13th verse of Daniel chapter 8. It says, the sanctuary and the host were trodden underfoot. Now, I know it clearly seems like this is in fact Antiochus Epiphanes. I know that's what it sounds like, but what you have to understand is this. Antiochus Epiphanes trodden down underfoot the people of God. But Antiochus Epiphanes never trodden underfoot God's sanctuary.
What you talking about, Willis?
You must understand that the trotting down of the literal, tangible, earthly sanctuary represents an act of physical aggression. It is a literal destruction of God's temple. Now, notice how the prophet Isaiah refers to the same concept. He says, the people of thy holiness have possessed it, but a little while our adversaries have trodden down thy sanctuary. This trodden down refers to the destruction that the Babylonians would enact upon Jerusalem and their sanctuary. And the prophet would then go on to confirm what this trotting down would physically look like in the very next chapter. He says, our holy and our beautiful house, that's the temple, where our fathers praise thee, is burned up with fire, and all our pleasant things are laid waste. We see this trotting down of God's sanctuary at the time of Babylon, when they came in and destroyed Jerusalem and led them captive back into the Babylonian Empire. We see, or the city of Babylon, we see this type of physical assault, this downtrodden, this trodden underfoot, when the Romans came in 70 AD and destroyed Jerusalem and laid waste to the city and its sanctuary. These are acts of physical aggression and violence, destructive in nature. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this cannot be when a pig was sacrificed on an altar. Even though Antiochus apostatized them and led apostasy in the sanctuary, this is not trotting underfoot of the sanctuary. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, because it's the sanctuary and because its main focus is worshiping in God, the trotting of the sanctuary, even though not a physical act, anything that's false worship in the sanctuary has to be a trotting down of the sanctuary. And to this I say, have you read Ezekiel chapter 8? In Ezekiel 8:16, the prophet sees 25 men worshiping the sun in God's sanctuary. And ladies and gentlemen, after reading this, we recognize that this was false worship in the sanctuary. But does anybody ever say that these 25 men downtrodden underfoot God's sanctuary? No, ladies and gentlemen, we say that they were in apostasy in God's sanctuary. But that is not the trotting down of the sanctuary. Had they destroyed the sanctuary, then we can say they downtrodden or they trodden underfoot God's sanctuary. So now, after all of this, we have to ask the question, if Antiochus wasn't the one that necessitated the cleansing of the sanctuary, if his actions for those 3.5 years wasn't the reason why the sanctuary needed to be cleansed, then what was? Now, here we must remember the rule that we determine. When a time prophecy can't be determined by using literal days, we then look to establish the rule that the Bible gives us, and it's not a day for a sacrifice rule. The Bible gives a day for a year. All right. So now, instead of this 2300 day prophecy, even though that's what it says day, we recognize that there is a principle in the Bible that we take a year or a day for a year. So now we're looking at 2300 years. And this changes the whole scope of the prophecy. And ladies and gentlemen, I would go into further detail, but we've ran out of time. And so therefore, in our next study, we're going to look at this 2300 day prophecy, but we're going to do it from the vantage point that it is 2300 years. And you're going to be shocked at what was cleansed at the 2300 day prophecy when the 2300 days was up. So ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And now you understand the clear and present truth.